Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that is just incredibly powerful, but honestly, so deeply misunderstood. We're looking at the anatomy of addiction. We're going to see how addiction isn't a moral failure, it's not a sign of weak character, it's actually a profound neurochemical hijacking of our brain's most ancient survival systems. So if you've ever wondered why breaking a bad habit feels, literally physically impossible, or why brilliant people can make incredibly destructive choices, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get right into it.
To really understand how we lose control, we first got to ask a pretty fundamental question. Why do our brains seemingly turn against our own well-being? I mean, we are hardwired to survive, right? To seek out things that keep us alive. So why, when we're exposed to modern superstimuli, does that exact same survival machinery basically push us straight towards self-destruction?
Well, it all comes down to the brain's reward system. Think of this as an ancient neural circuit that evolved for one main purpose, to keep you alive. It uses a neurochemical called dopamine to reinforce life-sustaining behaviors. Stuff like seeking food, finding shelter, or connecting with other people. Every time you do something good for your survival, bam, your brain gives you a little dopamine hit. But as we're going to see, this highly calibrated system gets completely overwhelmed and short-circuited by modern addictive substances and behaviors.
So in this explainer, we've broken the science down into 5 key areas. We're looking at the hijacked brain, chemical invasions, the behavioral traps, rewiring reward and stress, and finally, reclaiming your brain. All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the hijacked brain, where our survival mechanisms are under attack. The single most important reality about every type of addiction, and honestly, a massive takeaway from all the clinical research, is that it fundamentally seizes our ancient survival mechanisms. It literally turns the very processes that evolved to help us thrive against our long-term freedom. It's an anatomical takeover, plain and simple.
So here's the crucial equation you have to keep in mind. Every addiction, at its absolute core, does 2 things at the exact same time. First, it massively overactivates your dopamine pathways, which creates this huge surge of artificial reward. But second, it weakens your prefrontal cortex. Now, your prefrontal cortex, that's the specific area of your brain responsible for logic, judgment, impulse control, long-term planning. So when you combine overwhelming desire with completely broken brakes, the ultimate result is just a total loss of freedom. Moving right along to Section 2. Chemical invasions, direct neurochemical assault. Let's see how different chemicals actually pull off this hijacking.
It is truly fascinating how different substances target completely different systems in our heads. Take alcohol, for instance. It enhances GABA for the short-term feeling of calm, but it also triggers massive dopamine, which eventually shrinks the frontal lobes. Nicotine? That targets acetylcholine receptors, which actually alters your gene expression so your brain becomes hypersensitive to cues, like just smelling smoke. Opioids flood your mu-opioid receptors, completely shutting down your body's natural endorphin production, making normal life feel unbearably painful. And stimulants, like cocaine or amphetamines, they hijack your dopamine transporters. This leads to such devastating crashes that the brain has to drastically reduce its dopamine receptor density. It's like they all pick different doors to get into the house, but they all burn it down once they're inside. And the physical toll on the brain's architecture here is staggering. Massive cohort studies from places like The Lancet and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse show literal, measurable shrinkage in the frontal lobes and hippocampus of heavy drinkers. The New England Journal of Medicine reports shrunken gray matter in opioid users, specifically in the areas that manage our emotional regulation. And data from JAMA Psychiatry shows that with stimulants, the addicted brain eventually requires the chemical just to feel a baseline level of motivation. I mean, you literally cannot feel normal everyday pleasure without it. But here is where the science gets even wilder. Let's look at Section 3, the behavioral traps. No substance required, because you don't even need a chemical to trigger this exact same destructive rewiring. Think about the massive dopamine surge you'd get from a chemical stimulant, and now compare that to the surge triggered by something like gambling. Neuroimaging work out of the University of Cambridge shows that the uncertainty of gambling, and specifically those agonizing near misses, activates the exact same reward pathways and reduces prefrontal control, creating a pattern that is nearly identical to severe drug addiction. Your brain isn't just releasing dopamine when you win, it's flooding the system when you almost win. How crazy is that? And gambling is far from the only trap out there. Modern superstimuli are literally everywhere we look. Research from Stanford shows that the constant, unpredictable rewards of internet and social media notifications physically shrink the impulse control gray matter in our brains, which basically shortens our attention spans. Yale studies reveal that ultra-processed foods, those hyper-palatable combos of sugar, fat, and salt, cause dopamine releases that completely dwarf what you'd get from natural foods. Pornography provides supernormal visual stimuli that desensitize your responses to real-life partners. Even high-potency cannabis downregulates your natural endocannabinoid receptors, which can leave heavy users feeling emotionally flat and totally unmotivated when they're not using. Basically, all these stimuli trick the brain into expecting constant, endless novelty.
So what's the mechanical result of all these traps? Let's get into Section 4, Rewiring Reward and Stress, the vicious cycle of tolerance. This right here is the true engine of dependency.
Let's break down this biological rewiring step by step, because it follows a very predictable, very vicious cycle. Step 1. The substance or behavior delivers a massive, totally unnatural dopamine surge. Step 2. To protect itself from this toxic flood, the brain downregulates its dopamine receptors. This is exactly how tolerance builds. Step 3, though, this is the real trap. Because your reward pathways are suppressed, the brain's stress systems, specifically the amygdala and the HPA axis, become hyperreactive. They just start cranking out this constant background anxiety, which leads us straight to Step 4, compulsive use. At this point, you're no longer using to get high. You are desperately using just to quiet that unbearable stress and feel somewhat normal again.
And that brings us to one of the most absolutely critical takeaways of this entire explainer. Over months and years of this cycle, the brain is fundamentally taught that natural pleasures, like a good meal, a great conversation with a friend, or just taking a walk outside, are entirely insufficient. Without the addiction, everyday life feels painfully flat, incredibly boring, and intensely stressful. The brain pushes you for the next hit, even when your rational mind is screaming that it's destroying your relationships, your career, and your physical health.
Now, I know the damage we've just covered sounds terrifying, but let's look at Section 5, Reclaiming Your Brain and the Power of Neuroplasticity. Because this reveals some incredible scientific hope hidden right there in our brain's architecture. Understanding exactly how addiction reshapes the brain is actually incredibly empowering because it brings us to this beautiful concept, neuroplasticity. This is your brain's remarkable lifelong ability to completely reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Your brain remains remarkably plastic even after years of severe addiction. The hardware can be updated, the circuits can absolutely heal. According to comprehensive 2025 reviews from the World Health Organization and The Lancet, understanding these hijacked circuits isn't just some abstract theory. It provides a clear, actionable map for recovery. With the right support, the right strategies, and sustained commitment, your brain structure physically reshapes itself again. Those exact same circuits that reinforce destructive patterns, they can be rewired toward much healthier sources of reward, restoring genuine satisfaction and real-world meaning to your life. So recovery isn't just about stopping a bad habit, it is literally a structural transformation of your brain.
I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. We've just seen the staggering anatomical power your brain has to adapt to superstimuli. So, if your brain possesses the sheer structural power to wire itself so deeply and completely for addiction, just imagine what incredible things it can rewire itself to achieve when you finally reclaim control. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible science of your own mind. Catch you next time.